Good morning. I have my new phone today and I can see myself. Hi. Okay, first I'd like to say to Edward Hammock, hi! I'm so glad you commented, and I am going to consider what you said in your last comment. I want to cover that again in another video. But isn't it amazing? I'm going to be hitting 1,500 viewers subscribers rather, if it continues this way. Some of my views have been astronomical. I'm blown away. But today I'd like to answer a question by Esther S. And Esther, I know what you're going through, and you're a great lady. I want you to know that. The question was about my last video about how I got to Florida, how I ended up here. She wondered if I had children at that time and the expense of that sort of move. Well, we're talking about the early 90s, and gas was 65 cents a gallon when we reached the South. We were stunned. It was so much cheaper down here then. And so it wasn't a great expense. It cost us practically nothing, and we had 2 vehicles. Old vehicles. Actually, his Chevy van was a 91, and he bought that almost new. And then he bought me this old beater. Oh, what a dreadful car. A Chevy Malibu, like a 89 or something. Or earlier. I don't remember. I think it was an 80s car. Yeah. And, that car would cause me trouble later on in life, and I'd be alone, but that's another story. So how it went down was when I met Dennis, I had already been married, and I had a little girl, Rachel, and she was about 4 years old when Dennis and I met. And he would adopt her later on, about a year after we got married, because Jay just didn't want to be a part of Rachel's life if I wasn't in the picture, which is unfortunate, but the way it was. And Dennis took on the role of being her father. Well, I wanted another child right away because Rachel's going to be 5, and I said, she doesn't have a sibling, and do you mind if we have a baby? And he said, sure. He always was up to an adventure. And I had my first little boy, Dennis Jr., and Dennis was so proud. I'll have to dig out the pictures sometimes of it was a very frightening birth for Dennis. It was the first birth he had experienced, and Denny Jr., he got stuck coming out, and it was just a panicked situation, and he was really blown over by that, He wasn't expecting that. Anyway, so when we first came down to Florida, I was pregnant with Michael. We came down. I was staying in a horrible subsidized apartment building that I hated. It was horrible, and we got money from his father, and we came down the first time and stayed with my cousin. That didn't work out well, so we went north again. You have to understand, back then you could get an off-season hotel room for less than you'd pay for a rent for an apartment. So we started doing that, and we would leave well, we'd start camping, I think. If I remember correctly, we started camping. Is that what we did? Yes, we found a pop-up tent. And in the summers, we'd camp in Maine on the border of New Hampshire because he liked to do a lot of his picking in the seacoast region of New Hampshire. That's where we were born and brought up, you know. And then he started going off to do shows, and I'd be left alone with the kids. And I finally said, I'm going too. You're not leaving me behind. So that's exactly what happened, is he started dragging me along, and we headed down to Florida, and we found that rental. But, you know, like I said, a rental was $450 a month for, you know, an out-of-date and not the, you know, most modern neighborhood. And that's how we did it. Camping in the summer in Maine, dropping down to Florida for the winters. And along the way, we would stop and do shows. There was the Metrolina of, I think, North or South Carolina. What else did we do? Renninger's, Pennsylvania, we used to do, but that one just went south for us. Didn't do well after a while. Once computers and the internet came into play, we lost about a third of our customer base. They didn't have to travel anymore to the shows to find stuff. They could find it online, and the internet was flooded with antiques, and that dropped our prices. And so, you know, there was times of hardship, sure. There were times we drove into an antique show with a jar of change. We had already paid the show fee, but you had to pay for parking too. One time, this nasty woman who had taken over her mother's Brimfield spot told us, "You don't have the money to pay for parking. Get out of here." And her mother had been hanging around, you know, to see what was going on, and she come running over. She said, "Don't you ever talk to them again. This is Dennis Page. Dennis, you go ahead in. I'll catch up with you later." Dennis would take every penny we had, and he would put it into antiques and, of course, our living. And he'd spend right down to the last penny sometimes. But you know what? We always came through, and with flying colors, because he had the stuff. He was an incredible antique picker, and he always gave it way too cheap. Oh, Dennis. But that was Dennis. Yep. So that's pretty much my story, and I'm sticking to it. And hey, you know what? It's only 8 minutes. Want me to show you a wig that came in? I made a whole video on the 2 wigs from Especially Yours. 5 came in. 2 from Especially Yours, and I think 3 that are still in a box I haven't opened yet. Those should be the good ones. These were $30 wigs. Go figure. And that one's not looking good. That's over on the stand. You know what? I will end this video here. I haven't had my coffee yet. And let's do one with wigs. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Good morning.